Good evening, everybody. I'm going to start on the fire evacuation stuff, seeing as everybody's here. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. And the fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs unless otherwise instructed and meet in the War Memorial Park. Members, please note that this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. Please switch your phones off or turn to silent. And please I remind members and officers that in order to be heard clearly within the room by those present and on the webcast, you must speak directly into your microphone. Okay, so I have received apologies from Councillor Lee, and Councillor Meansbound is replacing Councillor Mumalaneni, but everyone else appears to be here. Are there any declarations of interest? Lovely. Okay, so I will now I'll do the minutes. So, are the committee agreed that the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of February 2026 are an accurate record? Lovely. I'll now sign the minutes. Okay, moving on to item 4, we've got the anti-poverty strategy update. So Councillor Laura James is going to introduce the item as the Cabinet member, and Daniel Garnier is going to provide some background. So over to you, Laura and Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to come along to talk about the anti-poverty strategy. It came about through 2 motions. One of them was the fuel poverty motion, and the other one was the children's poverty. So it came about from work from this full council. We joined in 2023, we joined the End Fuel Poverty Coalition as a part of that work. The initial officer, who wasn't Daniel, was working on this work and was looking very closely at the work that was going on in relation to Manchester and what they were doing around their anti-poverty strategy, and was meeting with them and talking to them about what they were doing. Daniel then came on, seeing that officer left, and Daniel took the lead on this. Daniel's going to tell you all about what he's been doing in some detail, but the reality is what he's done is great. He's been pulling together the partners to lead on this piece of work and get the right partners around the table, which we have got. He's then looked at, with Maralise as well, the interviewing and reaching out to all of the different organisations across the borough to talk to them and assess and gather their understanding of poverty and what their experience is, because it's all about people's experience, even as an organisation. Big piece of work is going on around the analysis of the in relation to the indices of deprivation, and we're looking at that in relation to bringing it down into smaller geographical areas. And then there's a bit of work that we're doing, which they'll talk about, is the lived experience, and I think it's crucial that we're not doing to people in relation to this strategy, that it's, the lived experience is a really big part of this strategy. Lots going on, really working closely with all the different partners outside of this piece of work as well. We just recently met with the churches together, and they're doing some great work with us on this. Maralise is tomorrow on the local children's partnership and working with them. I'm going to leave you, I mean, the reality is there's loads to do. We started, Daniel will talk about some of the things that we've actually physically done with the CAB and, with budgets, but it's about gathering of information at this stage and where it goes, the next stage. I think that LGR is going to be an important part of this piece of work in the future. I think that if you look at, there are other strategies that don't include, that are not part of a unitary status, but if you are, and you have health and social services around the table, it does make things a lot easier and you can achieve so much more. And I think that once we are a unitary, that we will actually be able to do something really very special, not to say that we're not doing now. And at that point, Daniel, tell us what special things you're doing.
Thank you, Councillor James. So as Councillor James explained, tonight I'm going to bring you more kind of a progress update on where we are, what we've done so far and what we're doing next. And also really want to use the time to hear your views and your experiences of poverty in your areas, what you hear from your residents. I think that'd be really crucial, I think, to help inform our strategy. So as Councillor James explained, I think at the moment we're very much doing the evidence base. So kind of looking at both qualitative and quantitative analysis. So there's the data piece. Around the data piece, I think, it needs to be clear that there isn't one single indicator of poverty. So we need to look at a lot of data sets. Sometimes data sets are very useful because they're very granular at local level. Sometimes they're less useful because they are either sort of at borough-wide or regional. So we need to kind of, work our way through that. And talking about this multiple deprivation, obviously that's a very good source of data, which is very granular. But we want to make sure that we also overlay that data with, for example, services available in the area. So when we look, for example, at a lower I apologize, I always get it wrong. Lower super output area, which is basically a very small area, around 1,500 residents. We want to look at those areas where we got high levels of deprivation and mapping the services that are available in that area, so we can actually overlay those layers to get a clear picture of what's available in the borough. And then the other kind of side of things is the qualitative element. And I think, for me, it's very crucial because data can be useful, but we need to always to kind of reality check and sense check the data. And through basically one-to-one conversations with a range of partners, I think so far we've spoken to 26, 27 since the report was produced. We've got a list of about 70 people to talk to. As you will appreciate, lining up diaries, takes some time, but there's really useful conversations because we get a really clear insight from those organizations that deliver frontline services to support residents, affected by poverty, on the sort of issues people come to them for, the sort of services they provide, how they work with others. So through that work, we can really building a clear picture of poverty locally. And as Councillor James mentioned as well, the lived experience element is really crucial. So we're working with Hampshire County Council and their insight team, working with community researchers. So we've got 11 community researchers going out there at the moment talking to residents. We've got a really good selection of researchers, both urban and rural, but also kind of representing the diversity of our communities. So through that work, we basically get that kind of really lived experience, what it's like for residents affected by poverty and financial insecurity. That work is underway, so we're expecting to get the initial report sort of mid to late April. So, once we've done sort of the assessment, we'll bring all that together into a report and really have that kind of strong, robust evidence base to help us kind of identify, where are the priorities, where are the gaps, where are the challenges that we need to focus on. I think it's clear that poverty is a very big agenda. A lot of it is beyond our control. I think, obviously, national policy kind of affects, that sort of things around the benefit system, for example, and that sort of thing. So we really want to focus on what we can do at local level. And as Councillor James mentioned, I think LGR kind of does open up opportunities because once you bring services like public health, adult and social care, children's services, education together, I think, you can actually do much more and be a lot more coordinated than we are at the moment. We are working with County Council, but I think, there's always that separation between the two authorities. So I think that's kind of, where we are at the moment. We've obviously set up the partnership, so it was really important for us to make sure that, this is not a council piece of work. It needs to be a partnership piece of work because we're only part of the puzzle and the jigsaw. So we've kind of brought together some core partners. It's a strategic partnership, so very much kind of to help us shape the work. But alongside this, we're talking, as to a range of people, so kind of make sure that we don't exclude anyone. And we want to work with the partnership to help us identify the priorities and shape basically the actions we're going to take moving forward. I think that's probably kind of all I'm going to say in terms of talking about the report itself. You'll find the report, some early findings through the one-to-one conversations we're having. I think what's clear, there is a lot of support available locally, But sometimes, there's a clear lack of awareness from our residents as to what is available and how to access the support services. There is also, I think, a mixed picture in terms of how organizations work together. So I think, there's some work to do around that coordination and kind of raising awareness between organizations of what each others do. We're finding, for example, as well, that very often single parent household or single people, I think, tend to be more adversely affected by poverty. Just refresh my memory as to, I think, what the early findings were. And also, I think, the shift to digital actually was an issue that was reported very often by the organizations, that there is a push now for everybody to do everything online, to claim benefits or anything like that. And I think we noticed that a lot of people don't have the skills to do it, don't have the means to actually have access, to a laptop or a mobile phone. But also, I think, when you're in crisis, when it's difficult, I think, to cope on a daily basis, having to go online and complete loads of forms, actually add pressure. So we're finding, I think, that some hand-holding is very useful from the organizations to support residents. Housing affordability was mentioned. I think, the mismatch, basically, with the level of rents locally and the housing benefit cap, I think, you find that actually that pushes people into poverty. And obviously, I think, poverty is not just one problem. I think it's very often linked to a range of issues like mental health, for example, confidence. So we're finding, I think, that ultimately it's a very complex issue and there's not one single solution. And working through our partners, we're kind of very much looking at, how can we start tackling and supporting our residents to move out of poverty. We're not going to eradicate poverty in the borough. We need to be realistic, I think, but we want to make sure, whatever we can do on the ground, to basically do it and be very targeted. So yes, I think that's kind of a very quick high overview of the report and the work we've done so far. There's plenty more to do. I'm very conscious of that, but we're cracking on. And hopefully, I think, the next time we come around to the committee, we'll be in a much better position to start talking about kind of actions and priorities that have been identified. And I very much welcome, I think, your perspective, I think, and what you hear from your residents on the ground on a daily basis, that are affected by poverty, how do they access services, do those kind of early findings resonate with you? So please do share your thoughts. Thank you.
If I could just come, just also, we are an exceptionally wealthy borough, but the reality is there are just these pockets of deprivation, and those pockets are in the most 20% of the most deprived in the country. So although we are a really affluent borough, and we need to recognise that, there is extreme poverty as well within the borough, and there's 5,000 children in poverty, and that's 22% of children within the borough. So, if you look at the numbers, it's significant. And then if you then think about those emotionally likely to be in a geographical area, in a certain geographical area, and so that the impact of that is even greater. So it is a significant problem, and we're looking at how solutions to resolve that, but we're not going to be able to, like Daniel says, resolve everything. So what we're looking at as a partnership, what is our focus, and how we can do this in collaboration with our partners. One of the next piece of work we're looking at as well is food partnership and getting all the different agencies that are involved in food partnership, so the pantries, the food bank and all of the other organisations, and working together to look at how we can work together, but we won't take the lead. And so it's really important on these things that we're not taking the lead. It's important that other agencies are. Again, we don't want to be doing too.
Thank you, Laura and Daniel. Okay, so questions. Simon.
I just wondered, when you're speaking to partners, whether because there's always something, isn't there? It's always struck me in public service that when you first see priority documents and business plans, et cetera, in lots of different organisations, they seem to be talking about different things. But actually, when you start boiling it down, it is exactly the same thing that we're all talking about. It comes in different categories and different names and different labels, et cetera, et cetera. And I suppose I'm always struck, having sat on the ICB for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, which has a budget of £3.6 billion, that they're sitting on an enormous amount of money and a legal obligation to invest in prevention, which they have not managed to achieve. So that seems like one of the biggest pots, where they're absolutely focused legally on wider determinants of health. This is absolutely it. They would just call it something slightly different. As far as understanding, when we've got a difficulty, which is what we'll have, which is something which is a borough average that won't help us for national funding, but absolutely small areas of really keen need, what we've done to explore with some of those local partners, what we can instigate sooner rather than later, because they've been sitting there with those priorities, quite a lot of that analysis, because to be blunt, there's nothing in this report that should shock any councillor, because we've known all of these facts for a very long time. We've just struggled to get partners to work with us to do stuff. So it's sort of, my question is like, there is something about, I get very frustrated with strategies because I've seen too many of them be reviewed every 5 years and nothing's happened in the between, when there are partners sitting out there with lots of money and a priority to do stuff, and we've got some resource to have a pilot to get on and crack on and do some stuff. So it's that sort of, how much of that have we investigated to sort of crack on with some people who we know who've got the purpose and the resource, they just need somebody to help them to do the right thing.
So the ICB, I think, is actually on the anti-poverty partnership, so it's good kind of around the table. We haven't, I think, identified yet any specific actions to kind of use any potential funds, because we're still working through, I think, around the priorities. And I think, as we mentioned before, because we're slightly removed from the health kind of element, because kind of public health sits with counties, the relationship is closer between county council and the ICB than we have. So I have to say, I think, we have more work to do on bringing the ICB fully on board in terms of supporting actions. I'm sure, Councillor Nasban, through your experience working with the ICB, sometimes, the actual partnership working can be quite challenging. But I think we're working through that. But I agree. I think it's not because we're not finished with a piece of work and we're not doing anything. But I think at the moment it's kind of really being. What I want to make sure, is we don't go for something now that we might regret later. So I think, kind of very much looking, where do we need to focus our effort and make sure that whatever funding there is available, we actually focus it and target, on the right thing to do. Because sometimes there might be a tendency of, we need to do something, so let's fund this project, for example. And then we find that it's a very short-term project. Yes, that could have some potential impact, but not the longer-term impact that we need.
I think, well, our approach is an evidence-based intervention. So really, we need the evidence. And I know you said it's out there, but the reality is we all know, or we think we know what that is, but it's actually gathering all of that. So it's gathering it from different sources and then focusing. And everyone who's sitting around the table is really keen that this isn't just a sort of strategy that sits on the shelf, and they're really keen that this does something. They really want that to be the case, and that's what we're driving. And so the very first thing that we want as well is that it's not our view of poverty, it's we need to make sure that all of those people that are being interviewed, and they are the interviewers as well, are have that lived experience. And it's crucial, if for any strategy to work, is that we do really understand from them what life is if you're living in poverty. We can talk about it as an indices and it's this whatever, but but there is a desire that it's not just a strategy. And I've produced many in this council over 24 years that so I am aware, but there is a desire from the administration and from the partners to make it not that.
If I could come back, Chair, which is, I absolutely get all of that. I'm just conscious in the NHS, they have money this year, last year, 2 years ago, and they will have spent it on things which are making no difference because they needed to spend it. I have spent too many times in NHS meetings where they've spent 40,000 or 80,000 on an app because actually they needed to spend something in 3 to 4 months and the app did nothing. And I get all of the stuff about lining up partners, making sure there's priorities, making sure we've got evidence and all that stuff. But I also have anxiety that says that people change in the NHS, etc., but actually, if I thought about the community safety partnership work, some of the best work happened despite a strategy. We just had good people working in agencies who worked with those people and went, do you know what, if I had £50,000, this is what I would do, and it made an enormous difference. And I'm just saying, can we do some of that as well as creating the strategy and working with the partners? Because that would get us a level of credibility, skin in the game, and I get all of that's difficult, but actually I also would point to absolutely, the NHS is the most frustrating place I have ever worked with, and normal partnering doesn't work with them. You almost need to grab them by the scruff of the neck and say, you will do this, or we will publicly embarrass you about spending your £80,000 on something. That is pointless. So I think you need to do some parallel working.
Can I say, one of the things that we've actually done is we've spent the money on outreach CAB. So I think that, has made a fundamental, and I should have declared an interest because I'm a chair of the Hall for All, where one of those services is being delivered. And it's exceptional, absolutely exceptional. And the people that go there come along, they don't have to have an appointment, they sit down and they can wait to have the service. And so that sort of service is fundamentally making a difference. So we can demonstrate things that we're doing like that. We're working with the churches and they're doing some work on youth work. They're doing work on the night shelter. There's loads of things that are going on in relation to poverty, but I don't think it's our job. We're not in the sense as part of this strategy to say to the ICB, you have this budget and that's not what we're about and that's not how this is going to work. And my understanding is from the ICB that isn't the case. They're just about to have to make some redundancies and they can't afford to make the redundancies within the ICB. So I don't know that's the case. Maybe Karen can come in here and help us on this. But there are some fundamental things we're doing, but we need an evidence-based intervention. We need to make sure that we know where we're going, because poverty, like Daniel said, is enormous. Where are we going to focus our resources as a partnership? What is it that we want to do?
Thank you. I'm going to jump in a bit, actually, because it's quite interesting to talk about the ICB, because I do know the painful experiences of trying to get information out of them and getting them to do things, working in the Hampshire area as well. So I had some questions, actually, which around the deprivation and poverty, because deprivation, depending, and I think Simon alluded to it, there's different classifications. Some of it's to do with rurality and lack of transport. Some of it's to do with potentially old age or infirmity. So there's different things. I just wondered quite how you've looked at that and how that sort of fitted into it. On the idea of the health side of it, have you engaged with social prescribers in the GP surgeries? Because they will be very much at the face of where things are happening, and that you'll probably get better results from them than you might do from the sort of the managers within the NHS. Also, action plan, any timescales, and the final point I want to ask about is how are you looking and engaging with Hampshire around the Best Start in Life hubs as well? Because obviously that's another part, and obviously we don't want to replicate information. Thank you.
So on your first point around indices of deprivation, yes, we are looking at all the indicators. So top of my head, I think there's 9 indicators. So we're kind of looking at them, and then obviously you'll find that some indicators like access to kind of housing and rural and services, is more an issue in rural areas than it is in urban areas. But you may find, for example, that sort of income and skills is more an issue in urban areas than it is in rural areas. So what we're doing is, instead of kind of looking at all the indices and all the areas, focusing on those areas that have got higher levels of deprivation, and then basically looking at each indicator separately and then overlaying that with, as you know, the services available. So we're doing that piece of work at the moment, because that will give us kind of that really, it's probably the most granular, I think, data that we can get, around poverty and deprivation, because that's really something that's broken down to very small geographical areas. On social prescribers, so yes, we have got a conversation with the health visitors coming up. Social prescribers, we're kind of getting conversations in, so we are, they are part of basically of our list of people to talk to. As you know, I said we've got about 70 different organisations that we want to engage with. So far, we've probably kind of just done probably a third. So yes, definitely, I think we're very conscious, that there are people that actually gather a lot of really useful information and insight because they are kind of visiting people and talking to people on a daily basis. And particularly, I think around that, the links between kind of health and other issues and poverty. So definitely. And the action plan. So I think, we're aiming to complete the mapping and assessment, I would say, over the next couple of months. So the idea, I think, is probably come back in September, I would expect, I think, with the sort of strategy, for a better word. And I think I do take your point, Councillor Brown, around the word strategy. I think for us, it's more the action plan, I think, is the important bit. I think, we want to work through the action plan, with our partners so that we are clear that, we all agree on these actions and how we're going to move them forward together. Sorry.
Best start.
So best of hopes. What can I say? So they're being rolled out by Hampshire County Council because obviously they are led by Hampshire County Council. The funding was given to County Council. We have tried to engage with Hampshire County Council, I think, to understand what's happening. I've got to be honest, so far we haven't got very far. They are rolling out, I think, in the programme is phased. So I think they're starting, the first one is going to happen in Havant, in Leon Park. Then I'm going to get those works, but Gosport, Alton and Andover are the next one. So we don't know quite yet when the Basingstoke one will kickstart. But as Councillor James mentioned, they're working through the local children's partnership. So we are involved in that local children's partnership and working closely with BVA as well. It's kind of involved in the work. So we are getting, I think, some information, I think, through our partners rather than directly from Hampshire County Council. But I have to say, I have tried to engage, I think, to help, to get meetings diary, to talk to them, to kind of really help shape the offer locally and what we can offer. But so far, I haven't had any success.
I think, to be fair, that's pretty much where they're at anyway, from what you've said, so that you are pretty much up to speed. And I know they're doing them on the scale of poverty and deprivation, so that's how it's working. Sean, next.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in a way this is more of an update on the process of the strategy, I suppose, in a way, which is a bit concerning because obviously we've, declared poverty as a priority, so we need to get things going. And obviously, I don't think residents will judge us on the quality of the analysis. They'll judge us on what we're actually doing and the difference that we make. So I'd just be interested to understand when would this work transition from research into actually sort of focused interventions, whether there's some sort of timeline about when we're going to be actually doing stuff. Because at the moment I can't see any KPIs or targets in the strategy, so we can't really assess whether the strategy is actually working. And then also one of the statistics that really jumped out to me is obviously the fact that 22.8% of people locally are depressed in Basingstoke, in the borough, which is almost double the national average, 13.6, I think it said in there. So what are we doing about that? Because, how will the anti-poverty strategy link up with sort of mental health support so that we can address that really, really concerning issue locally?
I'll come first. I think you've got to be careful because we are a unitary in relation to health and social services, as we said. We're limited on lots of things that we can do, but we are bringing these partners on and they're on board and they're really keen to do something. And they're on this journey and they're sitting around the table and we're looking at this. We are doing things outside of this strategy. If you think about Daniel's team in relation to what they're doing on some of the events that are free, and if you look at what I'm doing in relation to housing and what every department is looking at poverty, and it is a focus for us. And so there's lots of work as an administration as to what we're doing to address poverty. But as this poverty as part of this strategy, it's not for us to determine, what we perceived to be poverty. We need to make sure that we bring, if we really want to address poverty and understand it, we've got to work with the people that are living and experiencing that. And that's everybody that you talk to across the country that have been successful in actually achieving change have done that by working with people who have lived and experienced poverty, and they're part of that partnership, and they're part of the action. So that's a piece of work that we're doing. But mental health is a massive issue in relation to poverty, is significant. But again, you know, we as a borough, we can't resolve these things in isolation, but the importance of the partnership in what we're going to be able to do is fundamental, and the work that we will do going forward as in relation to the organisation, local government reorganisation, is fundamental, and this is going to be the bedstone of what we're going to do in the future. But not to say that we're not doing something now, but you know, we can see the opportunities and where this is going to go. Did you want to come in back on that?
I think more around timescales, I kind of responded to Councillor Dustin. I think, you know, we're kind of aiming to finish the evidence bit, I think, you know, by June, and then kind of start looking at the action plan drafting, working with our partners to bring something back in September.
Joe.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't declare at the beginning, but I will declare now that I am involved in Tadley Citizens Advice, which most of you know have been involved in that since it started many years ago. Firstly, I would say, having read the paper, it just sounds like everyday work at Citizens Advice. I'm chair of the Research and Campaign Committee, and we get reports every quarter about the types of issues that come to us, and the reasons people are experiencing issues. And I would say that we're very good at defining people being deprived in certain areas of the town. And I've done that myself in past life, looked at areas of deprivation to look for vulnerable people. But I would say to you that most of you don't realise that there are many people in your community that are struggling at the moment because of the cost of living crisis. And there are many, many people who you think are very well off. They might have two incomes coming into the household, but when the debts have got to the point now that they have those people are also struggling, and they may be your neighbour. So it isn't just a pockets of people. There are many people at the moment that have really used all their savings to keep going, and now they're at the bottom of the pile. And we have a health and wellbeing forum in Tadley as well, and again our social prescribers come along to that. And they obviously are doing fantastic work. So again, I take the point that you raised about getting those involved. And I certainly think that supporting groups that do some of this work in getting information out to people, it's very, very difficult. Citizens Advice in Tadley have done a project on looking at digital exclusion. And so many people nowadays are coming to Citizens Advice because they cannot access what you and I probably accept. We have to fill a form in to claim anything, we have to have a phone, we have to have internet, and we have to physically be able to fill a form in and read it and understand it. And people with mental health issues and others cannot do that. And we obviously some of the funding that has come from the borough have been to provide particular projects for Citizens Advice in Basingstoke and in Tadley. And that is great because obviously you can have a mental health project and other projects that can actually deliberately go out and target some of those groups, outreach and other things into the rural community, which we all know do struggle more for access to stuff. So certainly I take the point about having an action plan. I also hope that we can have some really ambitious targets of reduction. I mean, we hear the figures about how many children in the borough are classed as being in poverty, how many other people might be classed as being whatever. So I think to have some ambitious targets that we can try and address with others. I know we can't deliver everything ourselves. I do understand that this has to be across the board working. But many years ago, this council used to have a committee that talked about health and we had all the people from the health service and others sat round the table, and I think this is what you're doing, having that similar thing, but obviously in an officer forum only. But it is surprising what you can do if you know that's an issue, working and levering the money out from other people. I certainly think that that is a way forward. And as I said, when I read it, I just thought, I am aware of all this, I'm sure other people are. I'm a school governor, and my school has got children who are struggling with poverty. Many of them don't even realise that they can access information. So I know that they are working with the schools, certainly our Citizens Advice are working with schools on a school project to try and get parents to understand that there are places they can go to get support if they're struggling and help with their children. So I think these pockets of help are there, but again, it is needing to be coordinated. I mean, we all know that everybody does something different, and then you find out that you could have done it in a better way. But small beginnings, but good luck and keep going. Thank you.
Fraser from the CAB in Tadley is one of the partners that sits around, and he's exceptional, and he's really driving the agenda, and he's doing some great stuff. So I recognise what you're doing in Tadley. Can I also say the meetings that Daniel and Marilise are having with partners, you can have data in relation to the indices, but when you actually talk to partners and their experience, and I think that's what we need to gain, is understanding what it is that each partner, so, talking to a head teacher or talking, so it's talking to those people delivering the frontline services is fundamental to understanding what's going on. What their perception, because they live and breathe this and they understand it, and I think that as well as data that they hold as organisations, and all the organisations are giving their data and the indices of deprivation and all that data, it's that understanding of in talking one-to-one with those partners about frontline services.
Going to go to Karen next, but I just thought I'd better do my declaration of interest as a trustee of Popley Fields, where the Citizens Advice goes as well. But Karen.
There you go. I was just a couple of things. First of all, working in the NHS, we don't have any money. We're having to SIP our targets, and we have children. I work in CAMS. We have children that are waiting, that are in poverty, and my thinking is, how do we get some of these people to engage, because they become so overwhelmed and they're feeling in a very difficult situation that they just disengage from any figures of authority, any organisations, because they feel like they're got at. We have great difficulty getting people to some of these children engaged and into CAMS. I do think this research is really important. I think the research is very important to have that information, then to know where to target, who to contact, and what partners you need involved. I forgot what I was going to say, sorry. All the other things have happened since in the conversation that have gone into my head. But I do think, I was thinking about the children and the 5,000 in poverty, the number of children that are also waiting in CAMS that don't get seen, and and also I know that the ICB, and I'm not sure if that's what you were talking about, Jackie, is about they're doing something, and I think it's something called neighbourhood hubs. It's a new thing that they're rolling out. And it's neighbourhood something as well. CAMS aren't actually involved in that at the moment, but they will. We're not commissioned for it, but we are going to start sending staff along to start engaging in the different areas, and I think they're starting I think it was Gosport was one of them. But I think it's really important that we work together with our partners and recognise that money's tight in whatever organisation you're in. There isn't money to throw about. Everybody's being told to save money at the moment, whether you're in a council, whether you're in a NHS, it doesn't matter, they're all. And I think it's just important we work together to find a way of bringing these families and these residents in. And also, I mean, we recommend, in Overton and Whitchurch, we're probably a very affluent area. We're probably considered an affluent area. But I know of families that are very struggling in our area. and there's probably more that I don't know about that are hidden because you just don't see them.
No, I just kind of thank you for your comments, and I think, I do kind of absolutely take your point. I think, that the data, is one thing, because the data, okay, you've got deprivation in this area, but I think that's why the qualitative insight is key, because, talking to people, we kind of actually kind of get under the skin, I think, of what's happening. And as you said, I think, we know that some areas may have harder deprivations, but it's all across, across the board. We've got people struggling, and, in financial insecurity, pretty much everywhere in the borough. So I think, it's really important for us, and it's kind of where the partnership working is key, as you say, Councillor Watts, because, with our partners, we are able to reach those people, because through the conversations we had, I think, the authority point, came through. I think, some people say, well, actually, housing associations provide a lot of support, but tenants don't want to talk to the housing association because they're worried, because they're the authority. So working with the community multi sector is going to be really important, because they're not seen as kind of, the authority basically that's checking on people or might be, take benefits or anything like that. So that's why I think, the partnership, as you will see, we've got both, sort of public sector bodies, housing associations, but also the community multi sector, because they're going to be absolutely key, I think, when we start looking at the action plan and actually delivering actions on the ground.
Part of what I was going to say actually is part of these neighbourhood hubs and having things is having, and the digital poverty is, do we have, and I'm probably being really ignorant here, but places where people that don't have access to this, and not just in Central Basingstoke where they can go to the library and use a computer, but other places which makes it more accessible, that if they haven't got that availability, to have them in different wards that they can go to a point and be able to access and get help as well, not just have the machine there, but have somebody that can actually support them with completing forms, especially because it's also literacy as well, isn't it? We also have people that can't read, so having that support as well as part of this.
I would say it's a mixed picture. I think, we've got a range of community centres that have got that provision, others don't. You've got libraries, I think, again, they've got that provision, others don't. So it's a mixed picture in terms of that access to kind of digital support. And I think, for me, there's two things. There's accessing the kit, but it's also being able to use the kit. And I think we're finding, through partner conversations that hand-holding is really, really important, that some of our partners actually work with people, complete the forms with people, because as you say, when you're stressed, when you're in crisis, everything kind of overwhelms you. And if, having the idea of going, online to some really complicated form to complete without the hand-holding. So I think, we're finding that there is a lot of support available, but sometimes it's more the signposting. And I think, what we kind of like to move to is beyond the signposting, actually taking people to the service and supporting them through the service. Because, I think, you can say, oh, well, you've got a problem, why don't you go and talk and so and so, but then that requires the person who is on crisis to actually make the effort to go and talk to and so and so. And very often what we find through the conversations we're having, that doesn't happen. Because I think, it just becomes all too much. So I think, making sure that we start working with our partners on the proactive referral, I would say, taking somebody somewhere and supporting them through that journey is going to be really, really important.
In relation to the family hubs as well, I think it's really fundamental that we as councillors understand that process. It's very early, and they're quite new as a concept, but there's 4 of them, and they cover geographical areas. So Norden is in with the geographical area with other areas, So I think and they do meet, and they, so there is work going on. I attend the one that meets and represents my geographical area. So as councillors, it would be good for you to have a look at what is happening in relation to them. It's very early, and there's lots more that needs to be done, but they're starting to do some work, and so you just need to understand what they're doing at the moment. There's a lot more that can be done and should be done, but it is the process is starting.
Sheena.
As a lived experience of abject poverty, I've got a really good understanding of it. And poverty can be a huge barrier many children are not able to reach their full potential due to poor housing, maintenance issues for the housing, unsecured tenancy going from one house to house, expensive rents and leases, overcrowding, not enough money to heat, energy key cards, so expensive energy, and not enough money for food, and you're able to get free school meals, but in holiday times, at the time there was no food banks, but now fortunately there are food banks if they're entitled to. If you have loans or debts, high APR, if you don't understand, you're not having any numeracy skills, and the interest rates are so high and they're the least able to pay back. Not being able to buy school uniforms and shoes and winter coats. You could get a grant, however that's usually insufficient amount of money. Equipment for schools, like these days children need their tablets and computers. If you're poverty stricken, you're not able to buy these things. So would there be help for children with, with those needs? They need them for school. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult for them. Managing money. Now, that's a big thing. They can do this in schools. Lessons in budgeting. This should be taught in schools as a life skill. This is really, really important. Cooking healthy foods on a budget. I've done that lots of times. As a 17-year-old living in a bedsit, we need more support groups like the hubs that we've been talking about. Emotional support groups, because when you've got no money and you're really worried about bills, you're worried about when the next meal's coming from, you're worried about keeping warm, you're worried about keeping shoes on your feet and clothes on your back, the well-being, mental health, and general poor health due to all those pressures that are on you. Needs to be more support for children, and to identify where these children are in schools, in nurseries, in hospitals and doctors, faith groups, libraries. Sadly, we've had our library made smaller, but libraries are a very good source of learning, and also they have some computers. I'm going to mention something now. 0-hour contracts are not good because you can't plan. You have insufficient money coming in some weeks. Some weeks it's so low you're not able to eat. Low pay needs to be minimum living wage. And also you need to make sure all benefits and housing benefits are being claimed, because a lot of people don't understand the system. They don't understand all the things that they can claim for. And some support will be useful in this area. I would like to see all these barriers knocked down. I would like to see all these things under one roof with hubs, so that we can support our most vulnerable families with children and young people going out into the world, maybe sometimes on our own, to give them the proper support that they deserve.
Thank you, Sheena. David?
Thank you. I think often there's a misconception about the relative affluence and poverty in the rural areas and the villages. I know from my own experience living in Kingsclear that the cost of living in the villages can often be higher than in the towns, because if there's no bus or a poor bus service, you need to get a bus to go to work, or maybe even to go to the food bank or to one of the family huts. And if there's no bus, how do you do that? There's also, well, I did a walk around last week with the Vivid neighbourhood officer for the village, and what showed me what I already knew, that the differences between different parts of the village is very stark. And there's a huge difference between the way people live in different areas. There's also changes coming into the way people work. So yes, there's more ability to work from home now, but that needs decent broadband. And again, I know from experience that there's no decent broadband in the villages still. It's in some places there are, but not all. So my question is, will you make sure that the rural areas and the villages are considered properly when it comes to measuring poverty, and that we're not seeing it as an average across the borough?
I think, in the simple answer, absolutely yes. I think that's why I think, through the community research kind of work, we want to make sure we have somebody who actually connects with all areas, so that we just don't get the urban perspective. So we get that lived experience, in rural areas as well as the urban areas. And absolutely, I think, we're very conscious that poverty is not just an urban issue. And as you said, I think, we have got people, I think, living in poverty, across the borough. So I think we need to make sure that, we support everyone, within what is possible, if you see what I mean, at the moment anyway, before, things change through local government reorganisation, but absolutely.
And if you have people that you want us to, or Daniel, to interview, if you think there's someone that would be valuable for us to talk to share their experience, I don't mean a user or of a service, but, organisations within rural areas or people that you think are relevant that we should, maybe have a real good understanding of what's going on, please contact Daniel and Marilise and, share that information.
I think just on that thought, actually, one of the partnership, I know we're not the Transport Authority in the borough, but engaging with Stagecoach and maybe the community transport people would be a good idea too, so you can highlight where there are areas where that's a problem. I know certainly at County we've been sort of trying to push them to look at doing a review of the network around Basingstoke, but and it's long overdue the way everything's developed. But anyway, last one I've got on the list, Stacey.
Thank you, Chair. This is really, really good. It's nice to see this work being done. It's badly needed, and so thank you for everything that you're obviously doing. And thank you for making it really clear to read as well. It's a small note and a personal one, and to be fair to a lot of report writers, it's perhaps a lot less technical than a lot of information that we have to get communicated from other departments, but I appreciated it nonetheless. I think that the really, really important thing, and you have already sort of, indicated that you're more than aware of it, is the point about meeting people where they are, and not, signposting up and around a corner and down a flight of stairs and into the cupboard where the leopard is or whatever. I think that it's, and there are ways of I think a key thing is making sure that is something that all stakeholders are aware of, as well as yourselves. So, for example, where you're talking to social prescribers, obviously they're only sort of speaking to the people that they're seeing, but I know that the Camrose, Gillies, Hackwood, Beggarwood surgeries, I'm assuming all surgeries work much the same, but they, when they send out messages to patients for the latest, blood test that they need or whatever, obviously everything's done on a series of sort of tagged lists, who's on what, under what care and things. So automatically contacting a lot of those people, whether or not they have seen them recently or spoken to them recently or think that there is a need there, I think is something that they can be encouraged to do, because they have lists of unpaid carers that are registered with them. They have, you made the point about health visitors, but I think health visitors, and I'm not as familiar with the NHS as a lot of people here, but to my understanding, it's not automatic that you necessarily get health visitor visits if you have recently had a baby, unless there's a particular need. They don't automatically do the home visits anymore. So automatically reaching out to sort of recent maternity, lists, and same thing. And I don't know how difficult or easy it is for some stakeholders to access some of this, or whether they are willing to share this sort of thing. But Hatchwarren and Beggarwood is an area that is more affluent than some. But one of the things that I speak to a lot on the doorsteps, to a lot of people, is about being on the wait list for statementing for SEND needs. It's a huge leveller in the community. It doesn't matter how much you're earning. If you're on that wait list, then chances are you're not earning what you could. You're caring for kids. You're having to fork out for things that they are not automatically getting if they haven't yet been able to run that gauntlet of getting those the paperwork in order. And that is something that, that could be a group that could be reached out to, people who are on the wait list for those things. A lot of these, I'm sure, you already have on your list, and they're maybe just sort of not particularly noted, but where you've got, playgroups, I think is a really good place to drop in and talk to people, particularly the church-run ones. I know that you've got one church on board. They're often a really good place to drop in and talk to people, because it's not 100% clear in here like what outreach is being done with community groups on a one-to-one level. I think reaching out and meeting people where they are is the really important thing. You've got the DV service provider as well. I think there is a lot to be acknowledged around the intersectionality of deprivation, which I'm sure is something I know in the report it says about coming to EDI reporting later on. But I think having a deliberate approach up front in trying to capture the data is important as well. So that you get the data that indicates where there are intersectionality points. I'm sure that you've got BDDF on board and things as well, and that some of the ethnic community groups will be involved. But I think looking to capture data from that standpoint, as well as looking to address anything later on, I don't know whether it's too much, a bridge too far to, we know who is single because we know about council tax. Being able to approach single people that way, I think is important. There's something there as well about, I don't know what the long-term plan is for this work, and I know that some of that you won't yourselves know yet, but I hope that this gathering is not like a one and done thing for many reasons, one of which is, of course, that when you're doing something new and you're reaching out to people, a lot of people won't hear about it the first time or even the second time you're doing it, and the trust needs to be built with communities, particularly those who are afraid to talk to the housing provider, or afraid to talk to the police, or afraid to talk to the doctor because they worry about their kids being taken off of them, or whatever else. And I think the long-term point around particularly single people and young single people is really important, because it's not only, and I understand this is about abject poverty now, but in a long-term concern is that the different life choices that people who perhaps they might not be at risk of being out on the street this month or next month, but they are deciding not to have children because they can't afford to. And that's going to do something quite drastic to the demographics of our borough in the long term, aside from the very obvious point around us not being, having a mismatch in age demographics. And there was something else I was going to... Oh, yes. I wondered about slightly different comms for different aspects of this. There's something around poverty and deprivation that many people, particularly because I think over the last couple of generations, there has been a deliberate effort to almost make us feel this way. People often feel that poverty is very shameful. We see an awful lot, and this is a lot to do with, I think, blame shifting in a very deliberate sense about workers and shirkers and all of those sorts of things. You know, we're inundated with TV shows around, you know, benefit scroungers and all the rest of it. And I think that knowing where to go when you're absolutely on your uppers is one thing, but if we're talking about preventative measures and capturing people, then considering something that maybe doesn't mention poverty at all, but simply is about bringing community together to be able to have those capture points is really important as well. And so yeah, considering advertising there. I wondered about, it's a small point, there's data here on NEETs, but I don't know if it's as easy to get data on people who aren't attending school, because I only recently learned that Hampshire's duty is only to actually provide school places, not to ensure that a kid actually turns up or gets an education. There's a massive grey area around that, and that is a growing problem. So how to capture that is something. And last thing, there's nothing in here about businesses, and I know we can't demand things of business or control business, but whether there is some sort of inducement to offering a Basingstoke living wage. I think that, or certainly if we can't get people to sign up to that kind of thing in this economy, then encouraging reporting of pay gap data, which is another way of identifying intersectionality issues, and bringing that into the mix as well. Sorry, that was an awful lot. I look forward to hearing more about it in September. This is really good. Thank you.
No, just to say thank you, Councillor Hart, for all these really valuable points. I think, on the business perspective, with the Chamber of Commerce, as part of the partnership, so we're trying to get that business voice into the conversations. On your point around the living wage, we did explore, some time back, looking at, can we become like a good, what is it called, the charter?
The Good Business Charter.
Good Business Charter, but I think we thought that at the moment, due to the economic outlook, it's probably not the right time because businesses are already under a lot of pressure, I think, and they are actually struggling to keep afloat. So, but I think, when the economy improves, then you can start having those conversations about, Basingstoke living wage, for example. But I think it's the timing of it as well. I think, which would be quite crucial to actually get the endorsement and the support, of the business community. But I think, all your points, very useful and very valid. So thank you.
Manchester have a living wage, as part of their anti-poverty strategy. They also call theirs a fairer place to live. I think it's got, and I quite like that. I think that that's good, But I think that, like Daniel was saying, it's something we need to look at going forward and how we might, obviously we've got to look at people's income, but it's also then how they spend that, and housing is disproportionately higher, and that people in poverty are, disproportionately spending more on housing. So there's lots to do. This isn't a strategy they're just going to do and then it's done. This is a continual piece of work, and it will evolve and it will change, and things will come to the partnership, and will be similar to the social inclusion partnership. So it will sit there within the council and be a partnership that continues to drive this agenda, and this agenda will change, and as national things come along and change, but thank you for your contribution.
Does anybody have any? Oh, Simon.
If I may, I just want to pick up the business point, because it's not only about pressures with business. I'm acutely aware about all the stats as far as where do people who go into economic inactivity come from in Basingstoke and Deane, and a huge proportion of those are people who are, and I want to use an unkind word at our businesses sometimes, discarded. So they're long-term sick. So actually they go off with something which is really serious. They're off for 6 months, they're off for 8 months, and then eventually they'll be terminated from their employment. And actually it is that group that very often go into not going back to employment and become economically inactive. And that is a loss to our business community because their skills go with them, or their ability to reskill them, or actually just the growth of our wider economy. So I think absolutely there may well be something that in here that we would ask of businesses that would cost them something, but there are also some opportunities in here so that we don't lose those people from the economy or the skills from the economy. And I'm really conscious that's something that, thinking about lots of our business networks, we talk a lot about health and well-being in our business networks in Basingstoke and Deane, and it's a bit more about keeping employees happy. And actually, I'm not sure we've done much challenging to turn around and say, yes, but actually there is also something about broadening your view as businesses and not discarding people, because actually that early intervention becomes really important. I just also wanted to pick up the LGR point, if I may, that says, I briefly did some work in Trafford in Greater Manchester, and I think there is a real opportunity having a mayor in our region, because there's a huge amount of, in Greater Manchester, they are a cluster of unitaries, tick. They've got a mayor, and actually a lot of that flows from the mayor, and I come back to partners like the NHS, which is why Andy Burnham is trying really hard to be put in place and to have some decision making with the NHS. Is about getting them to spend the little amount of money they have on the right things, into prevention and keeping people well and away from the services that are treating them, and that becomes really important. And I just wanted to raise the question that, of course, we have got that starting as far as the combined authority, and I think this work will be really important, because what worries me about working regionally, and it's been mentioned already, is we hear places like Gosport a lot in our region, because they have a big cluster of need, and we're talking about pockets. So having delivery mechanisms that can do pockets, in my mind, protects us a bit from somebody going, need is driven by size, not pockets. And even in our own unitary, if we're lucky enough to have a North Hampshire unitary, our pockets of need will be outnumbered by Rushmore's. So all of those things become really important, that we bake that in and think of that future as far as how do we do the work now to get people like the Combined Authority to take forward thinking like we think, to make sure it doesn't get lost and then absorbed in a rather traditional sense of looking at needs and where you put resources, because we all know it's much easier to deliver services to a larger number of people. Scaling up is easy, scaling down is not.
No, just say thank you, Councillor Brown. And I think obviously, and it's kind of why I think, on your point around the data, this kind of that evidence base is really important, because then we've got all that to actually go and talk to the mayor. This is the position I think, in Basingstoke and North Hampshire. And I think, I take your point about kind of that kind of pocket versus I think, sort of wider areas. And I think, we need to think about the narrative. I think, once we've done the evidence basically, then how we start telling the story, I think, of poverty in the borough, and in your point, Councillor Hart, I think, what language we use as well, when we have those conversations.
Simon's comments made me think of something actually around the self-employed. Self-employed can cover up a huge amount of poverty. I mean, I've known several people running their own businesses who don't take any money out of the business by the time they've paid the staff and everything. And I just wondered how you are managing to try and harness or get a sort of an idea of what that might be like in the borough.
It's not something we're kind of working on just yet, but I think that's a very useful and kind of good point. I think, we need to be realistic. There are some kind of, some elements that we're not going to be able to gather. I think, because sometimes, there isn't like, a central point we can go to, for example, or, we would have to talk to kind of a range of people. It's not always feasible, but I think, it's a very good point, which we can certainly bear in mind as part of the assessment. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've finished on well, that was questions and really comments as well. So I will sum up. So obviously, I think generally it's an excellent bit of work on pulling together a lot of the data. Although as was recognised, many of us are pretty much aware of a lot of this stuff, but it's just sort of pulling together in one place. I think it's a very useful exercise. Things that were talked about was obviously around the ICB and how effective they were, and about partner responsibility, really. So although it's recognised, it's a summary of the process of the data analysis, and we haven't as yet got the action plan, but that should be coming by September, which hopefully can come back here then. But there was something that I'm going to ask if the committee would like as a recommendation, and that was to push for some ambitious targets to try and get agreement from partners, because I think that would be very powerful. Does it seem? Yeah, good. I think we recognise as well the poverty being everywhere, and obviously talking about the different types of deprivation, the rurality, and how important that is not to forget that side of it, because it does push costs up. And the biggest thing I got more from the officer side was that the main issue is around signposting and support being the key deliverables, I think, that are required to make sure people can access what is available. So that's something I think is within reasonable power of the council. And then Stacey mentioned about single people being identified through council tax. I thought it was quite a useful thing to pick up on, because that's obviously where it said there's quite a lot of poverty. And then, as I say, and then there's the trades and the self-employed was the last bit. I think that's about it, really. Thank you. So we now move on to item 5, which is the housing standards enforcement policy and the civil penalty note policies. So Laura will be introducing this again, and Chris is going to, I believe, give us a little presentation. Then we'll go into questions and comments after that.
Stacey, you said that the last paper wasn't easy to read, so I'm gonna test you on this one, and I hope you've read every line on this one. So.
I've read every line, whether I understood it, that's a whole different thing.
So, it is a really difficult paper. It's but there's so much that sits behind this. So. There's two areas to this paper. There's the two updated policy documents, the Housing Standards Enforcement Policy, Appendix 2, and the Civil Penalty Policy, Appendix 3, that form this document. This is a piece of work that we've done to update the documents, make them relevant, make them transparent and fit for purpose for today. It sits behind a massive amount of work that goes on in relation to housing standards. We have a team that do a lot of work, excellent work, that I guess a lot of people aren't really aware of within this council, but it's fundamental, and it's exceptional as to what they're doing. So the policy is a sort of a tool, a framework that they work to understand that, really. Both policies set out and will meet our statutory duties in regulatory housing standards, enforcing the private rented sector and ensuring compliance with recent legislation changes. And I think, I talked about it in my speech in relation to the budget. I mean, the fundamental change that's coming about, and it's so significant, is the Renters' Right Act 2025. It's an incredible piece of legislation that's going to come forward and make significant change. So it's important as members that we understand that. And Chris is going to give us a presentation on that. But it's really just to say that this is an important piece of work that sits behind a team that's doing some incredible work out there. And we, in relation to I don't know if everyone has this, but in relation to my housing casework and my casework that goes on day to day, this is the sort of thing that will be supporting that. And so, but Chris is going to talk to you about that. and Tom is going to talk to you about that. But yeah, but just really to recognise the team and what they're doing, and thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to give a brief introduction. I'll try to keep it as non-technical as possible. So obviously what we've got is the two policies before you, the housing standards enforcement policy and the separate civil penalty policy. We have current versions of these documents, but they've, as Lord Councillor James has just explained, had to be comprehensively updated to... So the policy has been updated obviously to make sure we're fully compliant with the new responsibilities, and as we just said, being clear and transparent to make sure we've got a really robust framework for enforcing housing standards. So if I just explain the difference between the two. So the housing standards enforcement policy sets out how we as a council respond to unsafe or poorly maintained housing, and how we use both informal and formal enforcement tools, and when we act in cases of health hazards, non-compliance with notices, HMO licensing breaches, and other regulatory breaches, if you like. So it gives us that broad overarching sort of provisions there set out in the overarching policy. The civil penalty policy establishes the framework for issuing financial penalties as an alternative to prosecution for a wide range of housing-related offences. It adopts a structured, nationally aligned matrix to determine penalty levels, ensuring consistency, proportionality and transparency. The penalties range from £7,000 for many offences right up to £40,000 for the most serious breaches, including unlawful eviction to major safety risks. Both policies obviously have been updated, and they reflect on best practice, including guidance from the Association of Chief Environmental Health Officers and Operation Jigsaw, the national bodies supporting councils with the implementation of this new Act. So the policies are there obviously for your comments tonight before they'll go on to Cabinet for formal adoption. So we obviously welcome your comments and feedback tonight. I'm going to hand over now to Chris, who's going to give you a bit of an overview.
I am going to get technical, yeah.
And you are going to get really technical, on the Renters' Rights Act.
Yes, we thought it might make sense, rather than just look at the policies, it's a deep dive into why we're doing them. So what is coming in, and I think Tom and Laura both said that this is a generational piece of legislation. It is very, very big, and we've had to do a lot of thinking about what we do and our approach. Typically, my team has dealt with housing standards, so what a house is made up of, what's the heating like, is it watertight. This looks a lot more at tenancy related issues, you know, what pieces of paperwork have been served, is it all been done correctly. So it is a bit of a sea change for us, and we've been doing a lot of work in the background with our colleagues in housing about what that will look like. So I thought if I take you through the Renters' Rights Act first, you have got a summary in Appendix 1 as well, which may be helpful to refer to. Then maybe if we take questions about renters' rights, then we can talk about the policies, might make sense. So, tenancy reform, one of the biggest parts of it, I think it's fair to say, that landlords will not be able to request rent in advance greater than a month's rent. So, actually listen to some of the stories before, this lends in quite nicely to it. And the really big thing here is all fixed term tenancies will become periodic, which means there is no end date. They just roll on and roll on. A tenant can end that with 2 months' notice to the landlord. That can be shorter if the landlord agrees in writing that that'll be shorter, but in theory it's 2 months. A landlord can only regain possession on some very narrow grounds now, so that's the Section 8 grounds, if you're aware of those, for things like non-payment of rent, ASB, and also if the landlord wants to move in or sell the property themselves. So that's all coming in. So a tenancy agreement should be required now, but this now puts it into statute that will be required, and that will be an offence if they don't do that. I'm sorry, the writing's got a bit down below the font there at the bottom, but rent can only be increased once per year. and the tenant can challenge that for free. And whilst they challenge that, that rent doesn't go up. And that's done to what's called the first tier tribunal, who are going to be busy, I think. So, banning bidding wars. I've spoken to colleagues in housing, and it's not a huge problem in Basingstoke, but they have been made aware of these issues where letting agents may encourage bidding. So a house is advertised for £800 a month, and then they start asking for a little bit more from the 5 or 6 people that may be interested even more, and actually there's this figure that actually the landlord ends up getting over £1,000 a month. It's capped now. If you advertise at £800 a month, that is the most you can accept in rent. And you said that some of the fines there are £7,000 up to £7,000 for those. Discrimination. This is what you'll see quite a lot on the news. I've seen is pets and discrimination. So there'll be bans against discrimination for receipt of benefits, people with children, and that's including those examples below. And yes, the pets. You have got the right to request the pet. Doesn't mean the landlord has to give you that permission, but they have to give you good grounds. So maybe a couple of German shepherds in a flat might be a good reason not to accept it, or if you've got 15 tarantulas, someone who hates spiders. So they don't have to, but they have to give good grounds why not. And here we go back to the start about the ending of the periodic tenancy. And again, I think this is quite monumental in that people will have that security of tenure. It's not the case anymore. If you're a private rental, you can have the rug pulled from under you and have to leave the home. So there's again, I won't go through all of them, but please do refer to them, the Appendix 1 if you want to look a bit more. What's coming in the future? Decent home standard. This already exists for the social sector. It's stated not to come in for 2035, but that will, for example, ensure that your kitchen's modern, you've got a decent bathroom. Arab's law, which you may already be aware of, is already coming to the social sector. That will, or they're citing that will come to the private sector as well. And the big one that's coming in, I say shortly, but it's probably next year, the year after, is the database. The database, I think, will really help my team. So every landlord will have to register on the database before they can let out a property. As part of that registration process, they'll pay a fee. They'll also have to put on things like the electrical certificate, the gas safety certificate. These are all things they should have, but we see time and time again that they don't. And then if you're going to go and rent a property, you can check first, is this on the database? If it's not, they've committed an offence. So Tom mentioned the new fines and powers. Alongside that, what's called rent repayment orders are going to be expanded. That means that if there's certain offences committed, tenants can claim that rent back that they've paid. And that's been extended to cover 2 years of rent rather than 1. We've also been given new powers over things like rights of entry and what we can seize if we so wish. So here's the timeline. As you can see, we're fairly far into that already. So the 1st of May is the big date for us. That's the date when this becomes, when this all comes in. Up until the 30th of April, you can still issue a Section 21 notice as a landlord. For the 1st of May, you can't. So we have not experienced an upsurge in those. I'm reliably informed by housing, but it's still about a month to go. So yeah, so that's the current situation for phase 1, what's called phase 1. Phase 2 will be more into summer next year. As you can see, the deadline for applications to court for possession of Section 21 is the 31st of July. The database rollout supposedly is from the end of the year. I think that's going to be done on perhaps one region at a time, and they're going to just test that one. And then we're looking at 2028 for the actual mandatory sign up for the database and the ombudsman. And again, you see there's a lot here that's quite far into the future, which is why we're just focused on renters' rights for now. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the Renters' Rights Act. Is there any questions before we go on to our policies?
Sean.
It's just to sort of when I was looking at it, do you feel that this may sort of unintentionally drive responsible landlords out of the market? Because obviously, and then maybe reducing the amount of private rental houses available because of the increased, bureaucracy, the amount that they have. No, it's all that everything that they need to do. They need to do obviously the safety certificates and things like that, and also maybe I'm just thinking, what are the provisions that your team are putting in place? Because obviously the expectation is obviously that there will be an increased number of complaints, inspections and enforcement cases. So you're going to be snowed under, aren't you? Because if there's one little breach, then you have to go through a process, don't you? And it could then lead to because you have a duty now to look at any breach. So you've got to look at it, and then you might have a load of breaches and cases all stacking up. So are you looking to employ more people in anticipation of that?
So first point first, there's already similar provisions in place in Scotland and Ireland, and studies have shown that actually it hasn't altered the number of landlords. I think what it has done and what we want is it's got rid of the bad landlords. Yeah. As you quite rightly said, these are things they should have in place already. It's just formalising that. So I don't know for sure, but similar data sets in Scotland and Ireland have demonstrated there hasn't really been that kind of gap in the market. And there was all these kind of stories beforehand that people would exit, and it just hasn't seemed to transpire there. With regards to resourcing, you're quite correct. We have a duty now, and that's quite a big thing. We also have to report on what we're doing on this, which we haven't had to do in the past. Yes, we're increasing resource. We've got permission to recruit another officer. We're also working really closely with housing, because there's going to be I think a lot of the people that may present to us with these types of issues may go to housing first. They're presenting homeless if the landlord's done something incorrectly. So we're upskilling them, we're training them on criminal procedures. That's taking place early next month. And everyone across housing and housing standards is getting training on these powers and these rights, because I think the more that know about it, the better. So we are very conscious of that, and we're putting together procedures so each team can do their bit.
Also, just to say, we're so ahead of the game compared with any other local authority. I just want to reassure you, we are so forward-thinking compared with what's happening. Like Chris said, we've got so much work on this, and there's a lot that's happened already. And, and just to reassure you all, really, I can't reassure you more that just how much is going on to prepare for this, because it is going to be a real sea change. But another example is we've got, which we always have anyway, is the private landlords forums that we hold, and I think you're presenting at the next one. But so we have a forum where we support the private landlord and do a lot of work with them. So we work closely with landlords. And this is about, we don't want bad landlords in this town. And, this is very positive, and we need to see this as a really positive piece of legislation.
Oh, thank you. If I move on to the policies, I won't go through them. You'll be glad to know. We'll be here all night and tomorrow. But I think what I will draw your attention to is some of the main differences to what we've done in the past. As Tom said, we have got these policies in place. Looking at the enforcement policy, if you look on page 4, right at the top, it talks about the regulators code. Now, normally we have a very graduated approach to enforcement. That's across all enforcement bodies of the council, and it's that hierarchical approach to enforcement. Typically, we'll start off with speaking to the landlord in this case and taking an approach as determined by them. Now, the renters' rights is outside of the regulators' code, which means for a lot of these new offences, the expectation on us is that we go straight to enforcement with the use of other prosecutions or fines. So it's a big change for us as regulators. and a lot of these offences are the ones we talked about before, the discrimination, the encouraging bidding, not being registered on the database when that comes in, and attempting to regain possession through means other than a valid one. So these are all things that we will have to go straight to the formal enforcement. So that is I would say one of the main features of the enforcement approach. There's a lot more offences on there that we've dealt with in the past, which again I will not go through every single one, but you will see on page 10 just the sheer volume of them all. So yeah, I mean that's the main parts about the Act to really to mention. Oh, apart from rent repayment orders, which I mentioned earlier on, it really formalises our approach to that, and that we will try and assist people to apply for those. We talked earlier on about people that may not be so savvy at completing application forms and likewise, but officers will, if they can, help tenants with claiming a rent repayment order if the situation dictates it. So if it's someone who's in receipt of benefits, we can apply for that regardless of what they wish, but we would like to help the tenants regain that if they can. With the civil penalty policy, which is even bigger, again I won't go through the whole thing. It's written in such a way that it's very prescriptive. It's very likely that landlords will appeal these fines. They're very large. It's the largest fine that I think, I'm not aware anyone could do anything larger than that. We have issued these already in the past. Typically landlords do seek to appeal them because of the amount of it. By having a really robust policy that's very prescriptive about what we do in which situation, it means that the chances of that appeal are a lot less likely to be upheld, because what the tribunal does is check that we've adhered to our policy. We are also asking the landlords, they have a chance to appeal to us first before they go to tribunal. Typically we'll get all sorts of excuses at this stage. What we're going to do is put the onus on them at that stage to provide evidence of such excuses. If there's a health reason, show us proof. If there's financial considerations, show us proof. If we don't get that proof, we will not take it as a valid reason. And the other thing probably to draw to your attention that's different from what we've done in the past is right at the back on page 38, and it's to offer a discount of 15% for a prompt payment of the civil penalty. That will aid in officer time, it will aid in our finance colleagues' time rather than having to recover it. So that discount is in line with national guidance, and it actually makes a lot of sense for us on a local level as well.
Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, what I wanted to find out is whether any of these changes that have come about would have made it any easier for us to go into private landlord properties where we have a belief or evidence that it may be unsafe. You will be aware that we've, in the last couple of years, had a situation where we had great concerns about a building that had, 200 flats in it also. So I think it's 300 from delivering leaflets there. Where we've had lots of safety issues, and yet it was very difficult for officers to gain access to actually look inside any of the flats, because it didn't trigger any of the things in our policy at that time, and it was quite a challenge. We did eventually, and eventually things happened, but it seems to take quite a long time. So I just wondered if the changes that you've brought in now would have made that any easier or not. Thank you.
Yeah, I know exactly the case you're referring to. I don't think it was a challenge for us to get in. We inspected about 98 flats there. We've served over 20 enforcement notices at those. These powers won't make it any easier. I think existing powers are more than sufficient. We could have got warrants if we wanted to force entry to flats. It was a bit different with those because we were going in proactively rather than usually we get a complaint in. to seek a warrant to force entry into someone's flat who doesn't want you to come in there is quite a big step, and we didn't think that threshold was perhaps needed for those days. We didn't have grounds to suspect there was enough risk to safety in those cases.
Yeah, so I think you've answered my question that it doesn't make any difference, and that still leaves me quite concerned, because although you may quite happily, in your view, feel that we got access, and we did, but I think others in this chamber will agree with me that we had delays in that, and there was quite a lot of concern from councillors about those delays. I mean, it's water under the bridge, but you've answered my question. It won't help us in this particular situation. Thank you.
Stacey.
Thank you. Yes, well, I like this very much, and well done on a report that is as simple as possible given the legislative background, and the policy is, yeah. Well, I'm not going to read it before bed, but you know, it's a good piece of work. So thank you for that. I had a couple of questions. I wonder, given so much of it obviously is underpinned by the new legislation, do we have the power as a council to go above and beyond any particular piece of legislation and say, well, our standards want to be a little bit higher than that actually? So, for example, where we're requiring properties, you know, to have like energy ratings of like E and upwards, or E and better, you know, can we require some that are even better than that? Is that something that can happen? So that's a question. I am glad to hear that there's going to be new resource, because this is going to be a lot of work for the team. And I think that this is a really, really positive piece of legislation, and I would like to see us implementing it as proactively as possible. Obviously, there will be, if there are people that aren't meeting the correct standards, then there will be fines that come back to us for that. My understanding is that money then, as long as that goes into enforcing it, that's fine. Because I see that there's the funding for the new burden of this isn't going to last forever. So I think it's really, really important, not just for the safety of residents, which is, you know, paramount and should be the first and only thing for all people, really. But for that reason, I think it's a good idea to go ahead with it. So I was interested. There's bits of it that, and maybe I'm just, you know, reading it wrongly, but there's bits of it where you're looking at notices. I think it was page 36, and it is referring to the different sorts of notices that can be applied in various scenarios. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like you're issuing like a 114, and if that's basically saying, I want this information, can we have this information please? And then if they don't do that, then we issue a 115, which is us saying again, can we have that information please? And then if we're not doing that, there's an application to the court to enforce it. But bearing in mind how backed up the courts are, and like the first tier tribunal, to my understanding, is already backed up to hell and gone, and that's even without this coming into play. I really, really, really want to underline my personal feeling that the administrative burden of that, without necessarily any immediate remuneration from it, should absolutely not translate into hesitance to go ahead because of the potential loss of the investment of that time, if that makes sense. Otherwise, it just would undermine the entire point of the legislation. And I'm sure that's not what you or your team would set out to do. But that was something that it looked quite burdensome from that point of view to me. And I just, wanted to, oh, and the only other thing I wanted to say is that, if there are bad landlords that are forced out by this, well, good. And can we buy their houses, please, and turn them into social housing? Thank you. That was it.
I can't help with the last bit, but you make a good point about section 11415. And to be honest, I've been to a few forums of this, and that has been discussed at length. We already have powers very similar to that already. We can require notices. It's part of what our day job is. We do it, all the time. So there's definitely no hesitancy to do that. The income from civil penalties, you're right, we do keep and we can use towards housing enforcement. We don't rely on it. We don't bank on that. It's good that it can be done in that way, but there's no target set. We investigate every offence or potential offence as we would, if we knew what we were going to do or not. So, and the other thing to say on that is that the database, the money from that, a portion of that will also come to us for enforcement in the future. We don't know what the fee is. We don't know what the portion of that will be, but that will obviously aid, and that is something we can forecast and use staff in that. And we've agreed that, as no one knows what the impact of this will be, that we'll reassess not just on my team, but on housing, on finance, who will be chasing for repayment of these penalties, and also on legal, who will be defending us in a tribunal. So all of these teams may be impacted. We're going to review this once implementation is probably been about Q3 next year, so we'll know roughly about the impact then.
Joe.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a comment to make that Citizens Advice in Tadley were aware sometime last year that the number of people suffering Section 21 evictions had risen, and I think people were doing it in anticipation that this legislation would come in, so they were jumping out before it came in. And it's gone back down again, so it was a glitch. And my own son was subject to that down on the south coast as well, which is very unfortunate, given 2 months to go and find somewhere to live. He's ended up in Yorkshire, but he's eventually going to try and come back down to the south coast, but there you go. On my question really is about HMOs. As you probably know, in Tadley we don't need planning permission for people to turn it into HMOs, and some of these houses appear, and we don't know whether they are actually licensed HMOs, because when I was doing a bit of investigation, I looked on the website and it appeared that you only actually published it in December once a year. Now that might have changed, so perhaps you can reassure me that if there are people during the year that are suddenly becoming registered, if that's going to be kept updated. Because obviously if I get asked the question about whether it is being run legitimately and properly and it's got a licence, I can't answer that question because the information on the website wasn't updated. So can you assure us that that may be something that we can have a look at?
Yeah, it's not once a year, it's once a quarter. And if we get an influx of any particular ones, we'll just add it on as and when ad hoc basis. If someone wants to report a potential unlicensed HMO, there's pages on our website where they can do that. They can do that anonymously if they so wish, or we can take details. Obviously, it helps us. These civil penalties, we've used them frequently for unlicensed HMOs in the past, so both for standards and the fact they weren't unlicensed. So it is very much a focus of my team. We've done a lot of work in the area.
Sean.
I'm just wondering whether you could clarify the penalties, because there seems to be something a little bit sort of arbitrary, that if they're more experienced landlords, then it will be uplifted by 20%, but if they're not experienced, then you can reduce it by 20%. How is that going to be judged? Because that could possibly, that could lead us open to appeal, because how you're deemed to be an experienced landlord is quite arbitrary, and maybe, I don't know if there's specific criteria. And then if during obviously there's going to be a transition period, I'm assuming, to the new rules, or is there a hard line? A hard line. So what are we doing to make private landlords aware of the new responsibilities that they've got? And if a landlord that maybe owns one house that they've inherited and they're renting out, and they're just not aware because they haven't seen something in the local newspaper or on the internet or whatever, that they make a breach unintentionally because they just haven't got the right, I don't know, energy certificate or something like that. Will there be sort of, are you able, I know you have a duty to enforce, so will there be any room for manoeuvre to say, look, you need this energy certificate, otherwise you're going to, or are you just going to slap a fine?
So the first point, the guidance on when we would reduce it by 20%, it's quite explicit on page 9 of the policy that all of the following criteria must be met for us to do that. So, and these are things we've taken from this national guidance that Tom referred to at the start. This should make it less likely to be subject to a successful appeal, because we're taking on this national guidance that a lot of the councils are now going with. And your second point, sorry, just remind me. So there's two parts to this. I am a big believer that landlords are professionals, and that whether you've got one or you've got 20, your tenant should be able to expect a certain level of safety and of service. So yes, there's discretion. We're not robots. We will obviously judge each case on its merits, and we do, and that will continue. But this idea that, you know, sometimes we wouldn't say one restaurant, oh, it's only got one restaurant, so we can let it go for a few bits and pieces. You know, if you get this wrong, we've seen on the news, real serious things to your tenants. So
things like mould and
yes,
stuff like that.
Yeah, any number of things. But so, you know, we can and will take that into account, but I do think that a certain level of professionalism is expected across the sector.
In relation to what work we've been doing, so last year, housing hold these private forums for landlords, and so we've been working on this, knowing this is coming, and had, I'm not sure what the organisation is that they had last. Do you want to say what?
NRLA, the National Landlord Association.
So they came to speak to all of the landlords, and so, you know, this is a really big piece of work we've been working on for some time, knowing it's coming, and so working closely with our landlords. And the point you say as to whether we would look more favourably as a small landlord or less lenient, or be more lenient. I mean, landlords need to make sure that they've got a tenancy agreement, they need a gas safety check and the electric check, and also the in relation to the status of the property in relation to ESP. What's the standard in relation to whether it's fit for purpose? Oh God, I can't remember. Anyway, so all of these, they should have them, and whether you rent it out to one family or you rent it out to 100 families, you know, this is a requirement, and this is a great piece of legislation. And we should really embrace it. This is great. No, you know, we just don't want that. We want Basingstoke and Deane to have high standard. We have in general got high standards of housing, and we want to ensure that continues.
Simon?
Chris, I'm sorry, I was just going to clarify, because you were talking, we were making a comparison to Scotland, so I was just checking some of the official government figures from Scotland, and I just want to, because there's something about keeping our eye on the market, isn't it? Because we can't actually predict what will happen, and I think there's just something adding a bit of colour to that, isn't it, that says the Scottish experience, to be really clear, is that the number of homes has reduced by 6%. The number of landlords has reduced by 30%. So absolutely, there seems to be some evidence that small landlords leave the market, but actually, you know, I may make some anecdotal view about whether small landlords are good, big landlords are bad, but I think there is something about keeping an eye on that, isn't there? So actually, what does that mean for our market whether that be availability of properties, because, you know, I can certainly think of some small landlords who have not been great and some large landlords that have not been great in my ward. But I think there is something that says, actually, what does that make for our market? Because our market will be very specific within the England context, but that's certainly that dynamic that seems to have appeared in Scotland. Whether 6% is a large reduction or not, it's still a reduction, and we just need to keep an eye on that, because we also know that we have a significant number of private landlords in Basingstoke, because actually Basingstoke for a long time has seen as been somewhere where you invest in property and rent out, which is very different from perhaps some other places when you look at the difference between buying a property and renting a property and the rent. So I think for me there's just something about keeping that watchful eyes, and that says actually what impact does it have on our housing market in general. Absolutely, I wouldn't want anybody to say that isn't, because, you know, protecting renters is really important, standards of housing is really important, but we also know from the conversation we had from the previous item that affordability and actually what happens with people's money is actually significantly important to their health and well-being. Thank you.
Anybody got any further comments or questions? Stacey?
Thank you. I did have just one thing that I forgot to say earlier, and it's a tiny thing really, but I know that you noted that the advertising part is not something that we have a massive problem with here, but I think it is something that I was wondering whether we will still, in any case, now that it is going to be a change in the law, whether we will still be looking proactively for examples of that, or whether we will be waiting for reports to come to us, because we're not aware that it's a problem, but then you don't know what you don't know. So that was the only other thing that, and I just on the last thing, and this isn't the place, you know, we're not turning this into a do we like landlords or do we not forum at all, but you know, on the affordability point, I had a look at this earlier, and the average rents in Basingstoke have gone up 43% in the last 5 years, and that's not bad landlords, that's landlords. That's what it is, that's what they do. So, you know, if there's fewer of them, the houses won't disappear in a puff of smoke. The houses will be on the market, and that's a good thing broadly. So, but sorry, the question.
Sorry, I completely lost track about what the first question was.
Proactively looking at ads.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, look, a lot of this remains to be seen, how we're going to enforce this, how we're going to look at all these different offences. Some will be harder to detect than others. The discrimination against children and benefits, unless you're stupid enough to be really explicit about that, that might be difficult for us to uncover as well. So we're not naive to that fact, and a lot will come in by good practice and training. Like I said, all officers in my team are doing training next month. So, yeah, look, if we get any kind of suggestion of an offence, all I can say at this point is that we'll fully investigate to the extent of our powers. We're not afraid of this. We're in a really strong stage. We're the only district in Hampshire that's ever issued a civil penalty. I think only Portsmouth beat us in the whole of Hampshire. So we're quite far ahead of the curve on that. We've got all this set up. Officers are quite happy with the process, and we're going to streamline that further. So I'm really confident. We're working really well with housing. Again, there's a lot of councils seem to have this push in between housing and housing standards about who should do this. We've got buy-in from everyone. So I'm really, really excited about this.
Okay, I think we've gone through that, so I'll just quickly summarise. So I think in general, obviously it's quite a dry paper, but this change to the law gives renters more security and protection, and it's really more about tightening up a lot of things that are currently there as well. There's a point that was raised about the HMO register. That's updated quarterly, not yearly, so that's useful to know. And obviously the sort of general concerns I think were around whether or not this could cause a shift in the property availability rented and whether we lose landlords and things. And I think the last point I've noted down was actually around the challenges in communication to landlords. It also goes for renters as well, to make sure they're aware of their rights. So I think that's really about it. So I think that's the end of that one. Thank you, everyone. So we'll now move on to item 6, which is the recommendation tracker. And we have got, hang on a minute, just, oh. We've got 2 ongoing, which was about the query on the graffiti figures contained in the report last time.
Tom is going to follow up.
We'll get a response as quick as possible. So one of them relates to weed spraying, doesn't it? In
Yes.
terms of
Glyphosate.
update the website so that covers the information that we need to provide. And I will come back with the
Graffiti.
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. And we've just raised a. Nobody had any recommendations for that last paper, did they really? Nothing to come up with on that one. We got one from tonight. Yeah. And that's it, folks. So last thing then is the work programme. So we are now looking at we will have the food waste in June. We're waiting for some qualitative data, and you should have all seen the brief update on that one. And if anyone's got anything else they would like to go onto the agenda for next year, depending on who's obviously around and things, but it's always good to get them in so we don't get caught out on anything. But you'll need to raise a work programme item. David, did you just put your hand up? Was that? No, it was just a... Okay, so thank you everybody, and I think we can close the meeting at 8:25.